Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel. So today we'll be talking about mean, okay, or the average. So we'll be looking at three types of data to find mean. The first one is our individual data, our second one is discrete data, and the last one is continuous data. So before looking at these different types of data, first let's just understand what a mean or average is. So what mean is the average of different values, okay? So for example, if you let's say got 80 marks in your maths exam and 90 marks in your science exam, then what's the average marks that you got in these both subjects? So the average marks cannot be 80, okay? You can't say 80 because you got 90 in science, and you can't say it's 90 because you got only 80 in maths. So the average marks is going to be 85 marks, okay? So it's going to be in between these two marks. Now, how do we find that average marks? It's pretty simple, okay? So we add these two values, which is our 80 plus 90, and then we divide these values by how many subjects there are, right? So we had two subjects, and in one subject you got 80, in another you got 90, so we have to divide it by 2. And when you do that, you get 80 plus 90 is 170 divided by 2, which is going to be 85 marks. So if you are looking at one more subject, let's say you got 100 marks in your English exam, then we would have three subjects. And to find the average, again, we would add these 3 marks, which is going to be 80 plus 90 plus 100. And when we divide it, we have to divide it by 3 because now there are 3 subjects, right? And when we add these 3 marks, we would get 270 divided by 3, which is going to be 90. So if you had 3 subjects, then your average marks would be 90. If you got 80 in one, 90 in the other one, and the 100 in the last one, then your average marks is going to be 90. So that's how we calculate mean, okay? That's what mean means. It's the average of things that is given in your data, okay? Now, these examples that we just looked at is actually our individual data, okay? So here we will have certain data individually, and we'll find the mean of those data. Okay, so let's look at a particular question of individual data. So in our question, we'll have individual values, okay? So let's say these are the marks that you obtained in your exam in 8 different subjects out of 75 marks, okay? So you got 35 in one subject, 36 in another one, and let's say you got 42, and then you got 45, and then 48, and then 52, 58, and 60. So what's your average marks that you obtained in your exam in these 8 subjects, okay? So that's what we are going to find out. Now, in the question, if our data is given individually like this, then that's our individual data. We usually represent this data as our X, okay? So X is the different marks that you obtained in your exam in different subjects, okay? Now, how do we find the average marks or the mean of this data is we have to add all these values, right? And we have to divide that with the number of items that are given in our question, right? So usually we'll represent our mean with X bar. And like I just said, the mean is the sum of these all data, right? And it's represented as summation of this X, okay? So this symbol is the symbol of summation, which just means add all these X, okay? So we have summation X divided by, we have the number of items that are in our data, okay? And that's our formula for finding the mean of individual data. It's summation X divided by N. So this is going to be equal to summation of X is add all these together, right? Sum of all these data. So it's going to be 35 plus 36 plus 42 plus 45 plus 48 plus 52 plus 58 plus 60 divided by our N is the number of items in our data, right? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 number of items. So our N is equal to 8. So here we are going to get 8, right? So our N is 8. This is going to be equal to, if we add all this data, we'll get 376 divided by, we still have our 8. And when you divide this 376 by 8, you'll get 47. And that's our mean, okay? So the average marks that you got in all these 8 subjects is 47. And that's it. That's how we find the mean of an individual data. So this is the most simplest and easiest data to calculate your mean, okay? So you just add all these data and divide it by the number of items and you get your mean. Now let's look at a discrete data. A discrete data is different from the individual data in the sense that there are lots of items, okay? So let's see. So let's say this is our X and this is our F, okay? So this F represents our frequency. Now let's say if you have 5 like this in your data, okay? So there is 5, 5, 5, 5. Then instead of writing this 5 like this, what we can do is we can just write 1 5 and we could say there are 4 5s in our data, okay? So similarly, let's say we have 8, 8, 8, 8, 8. Then instead of writing this 8 like this, what we can do is we can just write 1 8 and we could say, okay, there are 5 8s in our data, okay? So if you write this data like this with the frequency, then this form of data is known as our discrete data, okay? So let's continue filling up the discrete data. So let's say we also have 10 in our data, and let's say there are 8 10s, and then we have 12. Let's say there are 10 12s, and then we have 14 and 16, let's say. Let's say the number of 14 is 2. We also have 2 16s in our data. So if you were to write this data like this, like our individual data, then it's going to be very, very, very long, right? So instead of writing it like that, if you put the frequency, then the data becomes really compact, right? Very, very short, which makes our calculation really easy, okay? So again, if you write our data like this with the frequency, then that's our discrete data. Now, how do we find the mean of a discrete data? So in your exam, you'll already have your data like this in the discrete form, okay? They will give you this table and you'll have to find the mean. Then what you have to do is first make a table like this, okay? And then instead of adding these 5s individually, what we are going to do is we are going to multiply this 5 with our 4, which is going to give us 5 times 4 is 20, okay? So adding 4 5s and multiplying 5 by 4 is the same thing, right? So 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5 is 20, and 5 times 4 is also 20. So we are going to do the same for all the rest of our data, okay? So what we did here is we are multiplying this x with our f, right? Or we could say we are multiplying f and x, okay? So fx. So 5 times 4 is 20, right? Similarly, 8 times 5 is going to be 40. And then 10 times 8 is going to be 80. 12 times 10 is going to be 120. And then 14 times 2 is going to be 28. And finally, 16 times 2 is going to be 32. So what we are doing here is we are multiplying this x with our f, okay? So 5 times 4, 8 times 5. And by doing this, it became easier to add all these numbers, okay? So we don't have to add all these 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 8 plus 8 like that, okay? We have already added all the 5 and we got 20. We have already added all the 8 and we got 40. Okay, we have already added all the 10s and we got 80. So like that, we got all these data. Now, if we add all this data from this column, then we are going to get summation fx, right? So it's a sum of all the fx, which is going to give us the sum of all our data, okay? So when we add all these numbers, we are going to get our summation fx, which is the sum of all our data, okay? So when we add all these numbers, we are going to get 320, okay? Now for the number of items in our data, this frequency represents the number of items in our data, right? So we had 4 5s, 5 8s, 8 10s, right? So if we add all these numbers, we're going to get our number of items in our data, okay? And if you add all these numbers, you are going to get 31. Now, our mean is going to be, mean is equal to, we know that the mean is sum divided by number, right? And we know in case of discrete data, the sum is summation fx, and the number of items is still n. So our mean is going to be summation fx divided by n, which is going to be equal to, we have our summation fx as 320 divided by our n is 31, which is going to be equal to 10.32. And that's our mean. So in our discrete data, this and this is already given in the question. What we need to do is find this fx by multiplying this x and f, and then we add all those fx to get summation fx. N is just the sum of all these f's, right? And then if we divide this summation fx by n, then we get our mean, okay? So that's how we find the mean in a discrete data. Now our last type of data is our continuous data. In this data, we'll have different classes, okay? And we'll have our frequency again. Now let's say this class is the age of people living in a particular community, okay? So age in years. Let's say we have the number of people whose age is from 0 to 10 as 5. So we have 5 people whose age is from 0 to 10. Let's say the number of people whose age is from 10 to 20 is 9. And for the age group of 20 to 30, the frequency is 15. For 30 to 40, it's 7. And for 40 to 50, it's 4. Now again, let's make our table first. So here I have made 2 extra tables because we don't have a particular x in our question, okay? We only have a particular class or range of our data. So our data is from 0 to 10. Now what is going to be our x? We don't have x here, right? So as our x, we're going to write m, okay? What this m represents is the mid-value of our class. So in case of our 0 to 10 class, our mid-value is 5. In case of 10 to 20, it's 15. In case of 20 to 30, it's 25. In case of 30 to 40, it's 35. And for 40 to 50, it's 45. Now this is pretty simple, right? The middle term of 0 and 10 is 5. So if our data was, let's say, from 3 to 6 and then 6 to 9, right? How do we find the mean value? It's pretty simple, okay? Again, we find the average of these 2 values. So you add 6 and 9, and since there are 2 values, you divide it by 2, and you are going to get 6 plus 9 is 15 divided by 2, which is 7.5, okay? So in case the data is something like this and you don't know what the mid value is, you can find it again by finding the average of those 2 numbers by adding the terms and dividing it by the number of items, which is going to be 2, and you'll get your mid value, okay? Now that we have our mid value over here, we're going to treat this mid value as our x, okay? And we're going to multiply this f with our m. So in our previous data, we multiplied our f with our x, but here instead of x, we have our m, right? So we are going to multiply this f and m, and we'll get our fm. So for our first class, it's going to be 5 times 5 is 25, right? Similarly, 9 times 15 is going to be 135. 15 times 25 is going to be 375. 7 times 35 is going to be 245. And 4 times 45 is going to be 180. So we have our FM. Now our summation FM is going to be sum of all this data, right? And it's going to be 960. Again, our number of items is this one, right? It's the sum of all the frequency, which is going to be 40, okay? Now, to find our mean, since we have m instead of x here, we're going to write summation fm instead of summation fx divided by n, okay? This is going to be equal to 960 divided by our n is 40, right? Equals to 960 divided by 40 is going to be 24. So the average age of a person living in our village is 24 years old. Okay. So in this way, in our continuous data, we'll only have our class and the frequency. Since we don't have x, we need to find the mid value first, okay? And then treat this mid value as our x and multiply it with our f. And we get our fm. And then you add all these fm's to get summation fm, which is the sum of all our data. And then the number of items in our data is 40, which is the sum of this frequency, right? And then we just use our formula. So we have summation fm by n instead of summation fx, again, because we don't have x. And we are replacing that x with m. And then you just put in those numbers and you get your mean. Now, a small confusion that you might encounter when solving problems related to mean is sometimes this n is also written as summation of f, okay? Because it's the sum of all the frequency. And it's the same thing, okay? Summation f and n are equal. They mean the same thing. So sometimes when writing the formula for mean, instead of writing summation fx divided by n, people might also write summation f. And like I just said, summation f or n is the same thing, okay? You can write either of these things and you will be still correct. So in this way, we can find the mean of individual data, discrete data, and continuous data. So if you found this video helpful, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for future maths videos. Thank you.